El ne-a eliberat de sub autoritatea întunericului și ne-a adus în împărăția Fiului Său iubit, în care avem răscumpărarea prin sângele Lui, iertarea păcatelor. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. What is your earliest childhood memory? Can you go back there? Don't think too hard about it, just like the first memory that comes to your mind, as far back as you're able to reach into your personal history. What is your earliest or your first memory? Mine came when I was around 6 years old. My brothers and I were eating bologna and cheese sandwiches on a blanket in our garage. It was a sunny spring day, and my mom had suggested, she had urged us that a picnic in the garage would be a fun idea. Now, I'm on the far right there in that really nice t-shirt and short set that you're beholding. I've always found it really interesting the things that we remember, don't you? These seemingly random, disparate, unimportant moments from our lives just somehow get lodged into our consciousness, and we're able to recall them, and forgetting some others that seem like they should stand out more. I can still see the sticky traps that hung down like fruit by the foot to catch flies in that garage, and the bikes and the cozy coupe stacked on one side. The fridge that was always stocked with Sam's Club generic brand soda and Slim Fast, relics of the early 90s. When I became a parent myself, I laughed returning to this memory, because suddenly I knew my mom wasn't setting up a fun activity. She needed a break from 3 rowdy little boys, so she pawned us off on the garage for a few minutes of much needed peace. Recently, in a moment of prayer, that memory shot back to mind, which at first seemed like a distraction to me, but then came that still small whisper, that deep kind of inner knowing through which God speaks. Tyler, what is the message you received that day, gnawing on that bologna sandwich in the garage? I am a burden. I, naturally and fully expressing myself, am too much. And the way to be loved is to relieve the burden, to get away, to let someone else breathe, to unburden the one that I want to be loved by. Now, that's not at all what my mom was communicating to me. She is the most loving, selflessly given human being I've ever known. But it is the meaning that my developing adolescent brain made out of that moment. And suddenly I realized the truth, that this memory isn't frozen in my consciousness at random, but because it is the setting where the deceiver first planted a defining lie in me. It's frozen in my mind because it's a piece of my story that God's love has not yet touched, a piece of my story that he wants to take back and to redeem. Now, a couple weeks ago, we introduced a new teaching series titled God is Love, a one-word descriptor of the very core of God's being, his personality, and most importantly for us, what it means to be known by the Trinitarian God. We got our start with a sweeping biblical understanding to lay a foundation that we would build on in the weeks to come. And then last week, we took a break from the teaching series to hear from John Mark on the topic of peace. And today we go back to build on that initial foundation. In the weeks to come, we're going to be looking at sacrificial love, at the Father's love, at creating love and relational love. But up for today is rescuing love. And that takes us to Colossians chapter 1. Now, there's 2 key words in these couple verses that carry an exponential amount of weight: rescued and redeemed. So look back with me at your Bibles now. I'm going to read right from the top at verse 13. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Now, rescue is ruomai in Paul's original Greek, and it can be translated into English either as rescue or as deliver. It's the very same word used in the rabbinical translation of the Hebrew Bible when God promises to deliver Israel from Egyptian slavery at the hand of Moses in Exodus 6. You'll find this word again on the lips of Zechariah when his tongue is loosed at the birth of his son John the Baptist, and he bursts into song, "Rescue us from the hand of our enemies." And it's the word that we read on the lips of Jesus when he teaches us to pray, "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one." So here's the pattern. The biblical authors use this word ruomai to refer to freedom from a dehumanizing oppressor and freedom to a fearless inner life of peace. Colossians 1 follows that exact pattern by describing rescue as freedom from the dominion of darkness and freedom to the kingdom of the Son he loves. So the questions that you and I should be asking when we read these couple verses is, what is the dominion of darkness? And what is the kingdom of the Son he loves? And how we answer those questions is so very important. Because if we're going to understand what God is making right, we also have to accurately understand what's gone wrong. So let's start with the latter. To return to an illustration from a couple weeks ago, when I was young, I was taught a courtroom understanding of God. The Father is the judge issuing eternal sorts of verdicts. The serpent is my accuser. He is the prosecutor in this drama, and I am the accused. And the truth is, I'm guilty. But Jesus is the ultimate defense attorney, pleading my case, reversing my verdict, and finding me innocent. This illustration works if what went wrong at the very beginning was at its core moral and behavioral. But the serpent tempting Eve in Genesis 3 never once asks her to eat the fruit. There is no direct temptation toward behavior or a compromise in morality in the serpent's temptation of Eve. Instead, the serpent simply chips away at her trust in God until that moral action is the natural byproduct of a relational deception. The serpent's lie is aimed squarely at love, at where to find love, how to find love, who or what will give love to us, and how we give love away. In another one of his letters, 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul describes people corrupted by that ancient lie as lovers of themselves, lovers of money, and lovers of pleasure, rather than lovers of God. Sin is not the absence of love, it's a search for love in a place I'm never going to find it. Every human being is on a search to be loved, and sin is the attempt to acquire love by some means under my control rather than as the free gift of belonging to God and being made in his image. I tried to drum up my own lovableness through my body or my resume, my accomplishments, my status, my calendar, my possessions, my sense of security, or whatever. I'll never forget reading an essay on fatherhood from awarded and accomplished novelist Michael Chabon, in which he lamented how much time he gave to working on his books when his children were young and in the home growing up. And then he closed the essay with this piercing, honest line, "My books, unlike my children, cannot love me back." And that's it. That's what went wrong in Genesis. We don't stop loving, we just pointed our love in places that would destroy us. And because that's the serpent's deception is a distortion of love rooted in a misunderstanding of God's identity, a courtroom understanding of God may absolve me of moral wrong while keeping the serpent's core deception intact. Because even if that courtroom God finds me innocent, I may still go on imagining God to be a moral traffic cop whose primary identity is law enforcement, and to interact more intimately with this God is only because the law needs to be enforced upon me. The issue with the courtroom understanding of God's rescuing love is that my condition after forgiveness is not actually a repair of what got broken in Genesis. The relationship remains strained, and the relational category still stops short of love. Now, please don't misunderstand me here. Adam and Eve did actually fail to obey God. That's absolutely true. Are there moral and behavioral expressions to human brokenness? Of course there are. But all behavioral sin has at its root a relational deception about love, about who offers it and how I get it. The dominion of darkness that Jesus came to rescue you and I from is a relational deception about love. And the kingdom of the Son Jesus came to free us to is a relational restoration of love, because God is love. He created you and I to share in his Trinitarian loving union that existed before the creation of the world, and to go on sharing that very love with one another, and eventually to blanket all of creation in it. So what is God making right? Well, on the final night of his life, just before his arrest, Jesus, looking ahead to the gift of his Spirit after his resurrection, said, "On that day, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you." And then he goes on to reiterate, "Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them." Jesus is speaking here about rescue, about deliverance, about freedom from the lie you believe, and freedom to the life in union in union with the God of love. You are made to be a participant in the Trinitarian life of God's love, and now you're scrambling for love, for the significance you were freely given when you were made in God's image. And Jesus is saying, what you're about to watch me do when I carry that cross and conquer that tomb, what you will receive when my Spirit comes to make a home in you, is a repair of exactly what went wrong all the way back at the beginning. Biblically and well on into early church history, salvation was described as the Greek word theosis, an ancient word for becoming more like God by living in union with God. It's a word capturing the grafting of human beings back into the mystery of God's being, Trinitarian, eternally giving, harmonious love. It's what Jesus is getting at in John 14. It's what Paul is naming here in Colossians 1. It's what Peter drives home in 2 Peter chapter 1 when he says, he has given us his very great and precious promises. Why has Jesus given us all these promises? So that through them, you may participate in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption of this world caused by evil desires. You see, the early church emphasized the relational aspect of salvation. The modern church emphasizes the legal aspect of salvation. But what went wrong at its core was relational. And what God restored at its core is relational. We need to get back to our roots. Look back down with me at your Bibles now. The passage continues to our second heavyweight word, redeemed. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Redemption in the ancient Jewish context from which the Bible emerges was an economic concept expressed relationally. To redeem most literally means to buy back, but redemption was expressed within a category of relationship that exceeded the debt that was owed. This is the heart of the plot of the biblical scroll called Ruth, where Boaz redeems the widow Naomi because the family tie they share exceeds any debt that could have been accrued. So at great cost to himself, Boaz redeems Naomi by covering her cost. Why? Because we share a family name, a relational tie, a divine image, and that's worth more than any debt. All the way back in the 4th century, Gregory of Nyssa instructed all Christians to pray facing east, because In prayer, we're remembering our home, the land which Jesus redeemed on our behalf. And so we pray symbolically facing paradise, Eden, our ancient fatherland and true home in Gregory's language. And then later in the 8th century, another church father, John of Damascus, offered the exact same instruction but applied different logic. He said we should pray facing east in anticipation of, quote, the dawning of the sun of righteousness. This is the very thing that David's getting at when he prays in Psalm 19. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun. It's like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. Those who take these ancient instructions literally, who pray in the dark of the early morning, facing the east, awaiting the rising sun as a symbol of Christ's return, they get to behold the beauty of the sunrise. When God's light mingles with the darkness, and the two, light and dark, braid together in this gorgeous display of color and hue. You know, the sunrise is even more beautiful than the bright light of noonday. Isn't that interesting? That the majesty of light breaking dark is more beautiful than light and light only. Redemption is like that. In some mysterious way that only God could orchestrate, redemption's beauty even exceeds the beauty of perfection. God's light breaking in and braiding together with my darkness, the darkness that I choose and the darkness that happens to me. His redeeming love is so complete that it makes me even more beautiful than light that was never shadowed by darkness at all. Sir Francis Bacon says, God has in fact written 2 great books, not just one. Of course, we're all familiar with the first book he wrote, namely Scripture, but he has written a second book called Creation. All who pray facing east are reading that second book called Creation, the masterpiece of God's world that points us to the Scripture. Here is what redemption is like. Here is what forgiveness is like. His light breaking into your darkness in a way that is even more gorgeous than if there had never been darkness to break it all. All of this gets summed up most memorably in a story Jesus taught about a father and 2 lost sons. Luke chapter 15. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided the property between them. You've probably heard this one before. The son asked for his share of the will, which is an ancient way of saying, look, Pops, I wish you were dead and I'm honestly tired of waiting. Can I just get my cut now and get out of here? And he makes off with the inheritance, looking for love and accomplishment and pleasure and status and a whole bunch of places that destroy him rather than loving him back. Now, there's a lot of history Jesus is dragging into the story. He's talking to a Jewish audience about walking away from the Father. Israel was chosen. They were set apart by God. Chosen for what? For blessing. To receive the Father's blessing and then to become a blessing to all nations in the world. But blessing comes only in the context of relationship. Relationship is everything to this God. The entire Hebrew Torah is a story of withdraw and return, withdraw and return. An incredible inheritance from the Father that is ripped away and taken outside of relationship, and then the people return to God poor and ragged. That cycle, again and again and again. Every Hebrew listening ear on the other side of Jesus telling this story would be thinking, oh, I know this story. He's telling our story. So the poor ragged son comes up with this plan. I'm going to go back and get a job as a hired servant. A hired servant. That means he plans to collect a paycheck from his father. He's going back to his father, but not for forgiveness and love, not for relationship. He's going to earn back what he lost. What's that called? Religion. Religion is, I acknowledge that I've messed up, so I'm coming back to God to make it right. I'll do what it takes. I'll show you that I really mean it this time. Religion is trying to fix what's broken by the very method that broke it in the first place. It's trying to earn back the love that I lost, love that can only be freely received. And the son steps back onto the property. Now, Jesus is a master storyteller. And the entire story up to this point has just been a setup. He has been weaving together all of these different events to get to this moment, because the father-son meeting on the edge of the property exactly mirrors an ancient kezazah ceremony. Ancient Israel was an honor-shame culture. If a son humiliated his father by rejecting him, bringing shame not only on him, but on the entire family name, and then had the audacity to show his face to the wider community again, he was in for it. The entire village would gather together right on the city border while the rebellious son stood opposite them. And then one representative from the village, almost always the biological father, would step forward, smash a clay pot on the ground, and let out this full-throated scream, "You are now cut off from your people." The clay pot was meant to symbolize the rebellious individual in the face of the broader community, totally broken, entirely irredeemable. In fact, our English word ostracize comes from the ancient Greek ostrakizo, which literally means to banish by voting with pot shards. This ancient ceremony was so common, it gave us some of our modern vocabulary. Just imagine being in the ancient crowd when Jesus told the story. A dishonored father is running out to meet his wayward son on the border of the property, and the rest of the household and the staff and everybody else is gathering there to witness the meeting. Now, the vast majority of people in that crowd would be thinking, okay, the father gets his revenge. Here we go. Who's carrying the clay pot? Finally, this father can distance himself from his son's embarrassing behavior. Finally, he can stop wearing the shame of his offspring. Finally, he can get a little bit of closure on this parental nightmare. That's what most in the crowd are thinking. And then there's probably a few sprinkled in the crowd who are particularly spiritually devout thinking, hang on, this is a prophet speaking? And he's been telling our story. We are the lost son dragging ourselves back, ragged again. Our apology speech, our last-ditch effort at mending what was broken has failed. Our religion isn't enough. He's saying that Yahweh is performing a kezazah ceremony on us that we've left one too many times. We're being ostracized. And into that kind of imagination, Jesus says, verse 20, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to meet his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The father ran. Now you got to understand, Jewish men didn't run. Boys run. Slaves run. Distinguished Jewish men, property owners, they don't run. Because to run, you would have to lift up your robes and expose your legs, which is culturally disgraceful. Why would this father run? Because he has to get there first. The kezazah ceremony is permanent, can't be undone. It cuts a son off from his father forever. If the rest of the village beats the father there, they will cut off relationship. Everyone else has in mind to humiliate the son. The father has in mind to forgive and restore the son. He's got to get there first. Verse 21, the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. The lost son, right there in the midst of his weakness, was rescued and redeemed. He was enveloped in the very love of the Father he was freely given at first, had walked away from, gone looking for everywhere else, and it only destroyed him, and he is enveloped right back into that love. The core issue that was broken is the core issue that's restored, and the Father had to pay a hefty price to buy back his son's debt. And yet he does it, no questions asked. He absorbs the cost. The financial cost was huge, half the estate. But that is nothing compared to the family name that they share, the identity that the lost son was given first and still carried and in fact could never lose. But there's more cost absorbed here than just the finances. The father is waiting and watching for his wayward son, we're told. How long does it take to spend half the estate? Months? Years? And every day, the father is gazing out at the horizon, waiting, hoping to see his son's silhouette there somewhere near on the edge of the family property. Each new day filled with hope. Is he home yet? Is he home yet? Is he home yet? And then he sees him a long way off and he ran. I've got to get there first. I've got to receive him before they can condemn him. I've got to affirm him before they can humiliate him. He wasn't interested in undressing himself of his son's shame. He was interested in clothing his son in the honor he thinks he's lost. So the father lifts up his robes and humiliates himself. The story has built up to the moment of the son's humiliation and disgrace, and then it didn't happen. He was honored and welcomed instead. Why? Because the father humiliated himself. He took the son's humiliation and he wore it himself. The father wore the very shame that was his son's to wear. And that is the twist ending of Jesus' most familiar story. God is the one who wears my shame, so I don't have to anymore. And in fact, not long after this, many in that very crowd would watch as the storyteller himself was publicly tried, never defended himself, had a mocking crown of thorns rammed down around his head and a sarcastic sign reading King of the Jews nailed to the cross that they nailed him to. He was ostracized, humiliated, disgraced, and I wonder how many of them remember this story on that day. When he was alive, Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And when he died, one of the witnesses said, surely this man was the Son of God. He was connecting the dots. Oh my word. This is what God is like. So I was in prayer recounting my earliest childhood memory to God, realizing that the deceiver had planted a lie in me way back then, a bologna and cheese sandwich garage picnic that to my little developing mind carried a message that I am a burden. I, naturally and fully expressing myself, am too much, and the way to be loved is to relieve the burden, to get away, to let somebody else breathe, to unburden the one that I want to be loved by. And right then and there, in a moment of prayer and the honesty of that realization, the master director kind of changed scenes, and another memory shot to my mind just from a couple of years ago, Thanksgiving 2023, when after a particularly full season of work and travel and family activity, I had planned a surprise excursion for Kirsten to the Society Hotel, just an hour or so up the gorge in Benjamin, a fancy oasis in a picturesque setting right there on the river. Sauna, cold plunge, hot tub, steam room, unreasonably priced wine and cheese, they have it all. Everything you want for a little bit of pampering and R&R. But we also have 3 little ones who are professionals at disturbing the peace of relaxing adults. So I'd booked a separate cabin for me and the 3 little boys, and I'd put Kirsten in a room all to herself, and I was playing basketball and foosball with them in the gym while Kirsten breathed in the eucalyptus air with all the fancy pants adults. I was trying to serve my wife, to sweep her off her feet in a grand gesture of love following a season of, well, for her at least, quite understandable stress, a burden that I could help relieve, but I was doing just fine, still had more in the tank to give. Exactly 72 hours prior to this, I had sat in a dermatologist's office having the itchy, painful hives that were covering my left side inspected. Shingles, sir. No doubt about it. The doc looked at me quizzically and honestly asked me, how are you even standing this? Why would you let it get this bad? You should have come in weeks ago. Now, shingles, if you're not aware, is a horribly painful outbreak of sores on the skin, and it's caused almost exclusively by carrying high levels of stress. A moment of unwelcome realization that if the body keeps the score, I'm losing. So there I am, covered in my body's red alert system for high stress, tucked away in a separate room at the same hotel to give my wife a little bit of space, all of it in a sincere bid for love. Because somewhere deep beneath my logical processing, buried in my subconscious is a lie that I am a burden. I, naturally and fully expressing myself, am too much. And the way to be loved by the one I want love from is to relieve the burden, to get away, to let somebody else breathe, to unburden them. Here I was in my late 30s, pastor of a church, national director of a prayer movement, author of a few books, desperately wanting to be loved and looking for it exactly where the deceiver told me I could find it. By unburdening somebody else of responsibility, of others, of me. And that's important, that the deceiver is the one that told me this lie, not my mother. My mom didn't tell me that story. I grew up in the healthiest home you can imagine. Amazing mom and dad, best parents in the world. The deceiver, the accuser, the father of lies, seized an opportunity from an innocent moment in my childhood to tell me that story. And I remember that moment. It's frozen in my imagination, not at random, but because it's a place in my personal history that God's love has not yet touched. A part of me that he still wants to redeem. You know, psychologically speaking, who you are was most profoundly determined in the first decade of your life. Everything we learn as a child, whether it's taught directly or indirectly, gets deeply ingrained in us, and we live out of it for the many decades that follow. The medical reason for that is brain plasticity. Your thought and behavioral patterns are moldable as a kid, but your brain is like Play-Doh that's left out in the open air. It hardens and becomes more difficult to mold over time. That's why a kid who picks his nose and watches cartoons can learn to speak Portuguese faster than the top lawyer at Portland's most exclusive firm, because that kid's brain is like fresh Play-Doh and that lawyer's is like hardened, cracked, crumbly Play-Doh. The very same principle that holds for learning productive things also holds for learning destructive things. The same kid that learns languages quickly also learns rejection, dysfunction, and shame quickly. As kids, we instinctively pick up narratives that become themes in our lives. Like, what makes me lovable? What makes me valuable? What makes me feel safe? And what parts of me do I need to hide? What careful dance do I need to do to survive in this world? Every single one of us answered questions like those before we had the intellectual capacity to interact with questions like those. And for the vast majority of people, those caught, not taught childhood lessons become the foundation that we live from for the rest of our lives. So here I am, stressed to the point of shingles, trying to be strong enough, competent enough, low maintenance enough to be loved by the person I want love from the most. Here I am in my late 30s at the Society Hotel, living out a lie that the ancient deceiver told me at 6 years old in my childhood garage. You know what I find most interesting about the rescuing love that is depicted so plainly by Paul in Colossians 1? It's the simple fact that these words are recorded in a letter that's addressed to the church. Because these are the very fundamentals of salvation, of life in Jesus. They're the way in to become his follower. But Paul is writing to a bunch of people who are already following Jesus. Like, if this was an evangelistic rally, that would be one thing. But why would the recipients of this letter need the basics? Because we can celebrate the story of God's rescue while still living in a story of trying to rescue ourselves. Because we can recite and celebrate the truth while still living lies. You know, in spite of the many years of following Jesus that you might have under your belt, the parts of yourself that you keep out of reach of God's love, they can still be identified, and they're called shame. And shame is really easy to feel, but it's really hard to define because shame is a storyteller. It's a kind of guilt that gets into us and gets its talons into our identity. Guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is something is wrong with me. There's this moment in Will Smith's memoir right at the beginning when he describes that he was just a kid and he witnessed his father physically abusing his mother right there in the family living room. And he just froze. Now, he's the oldest son. It's a defining moment for him to step in and step up, to say something, to fight back, to defend his mom in some way, and he just froze. And then his little brother, who was standing behind him, steps around him and in between the two of them and begins to defend his mother. And that, says Will, is the defining moment of my life. It's the one I've never stopped living in response to, the moment I've tried to make up for with every accomplishment I've ever gained, every album I've ever released, every role I've ever been cast in. That's shame. It's a part of me that love hasn't touched. And so instead of being redeemed by the author, shame gets to become the author, grabbing the pen and writing a story that I walk in cooperation with in the days of my life. I didn't quite finish that story Jesus told in Luke 15. I said it's about a father and two lost sons, but we only talked about one of them. The older brother, the one who stayed home out working in the field. That's where he is when he hears the music playing and he smells the barbecue, and he wanders back to the house to see his dad and little brother just raging together on the dance floor. And his father later comes and finds him with his arms crossed outside the party. I've been faithful to you this whole time. I never wandered off. I never burdened you like he did. In fact, I've taken care of so much, I've unburdened you. I've helped you, I've loved you, and I've never felt love from you like that. Verse 31, my son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. See, the truth is the older brother's every bit as prodigal as the younger. He's trying to earn his father's love, to drum up his own lovableness, chasing the very thing his brother chased by making off with the inheritance, by keeping the inheritance safe and staying right here on the family property. But he is every bit as shame-drenched as the one who's draped over the pig slop, because he still has a twisted mental picture of his father. Dad's unfair, his love is dished out conditionally, and he doesn't see my efforts. The older brother is walking the line morally and behaviorally, but the core of the serpent's deception, remember, is a misunderstanding of God's identity, not a transgression of moral boundaries. The older brother's found a way of staying on the father's property with his hands and feet, while his mind and heart remain captive to the dominion of darkness that his father is longing to rescue him from. We're all ashamed. And shame will turn some of us into vagabonds, addicts, bent over the pig slop for a bite to eat. And shame will turn others of us into high achievers, awarded actors, or put together pastors, or leading executives, heirs to the family business. But unless we allow God to restore exactly what got broken, then shame drives every last one of us further and further from the very love that we're always looking for. The older brother talked to his father every day. But what he needed was exactly what he was spending his life trying to convince everyone else, and probably himself too, that he didn't need. And that was to see his father running out to meet him, to redeem him at the edge of the property. If you know me even distantly, you know that shingles turned out to be the very least of my health concerns. A month later, I was being awoken in the night by sharp abdominal pains that, as it turns out, were the result of 2 malignant tumors that were growing in my stomach, a cancer diagnosis that had shocked me, but I thought was dealt with a while before was back with a vengeance and now at the most advanced stage. Cancer, among other things, meant that I was weak and high maintenance to the very people that I wanted love from for a prolonged period of time. Worst nightmare for someone who believes that core lie that the deceiver buried in me first, that I get love by unburdening others. I felt ugly, unattractive to Kirsten, not resembling the man that she married, wearing weakness on my body in a way I couldn't hide. And I felt annoying, had to be driven back and forth to an unthinkable amount of appointments and treatments, special food prepared for me that I couldn't even stomach half the time anyway. And the treatment I received was so toxic that I had to sleep quarantined and bathe quarantined and have my laundry double washed and sanitized separately from everybody else's, all to keep my wife and kids safe from the poison cocktail they were drip feeding me through chemotherapy. And that lasted for 6 months. And it was followed by a year of a hyper-restrictive anti-tumor diet and weekly appointments for ongoing treatment and scans and x-rays and check-ins that all needed to be scheduled. I'd cleared one hurdle, but that didn't unburden anyone, most especially not Kirsten, the one that I wanted love from the most, the one that I desperately wanted to unburden, to not be too much for. I was weak, high maintenance, needy. I was too much in the most profound sense. And in the twisted lie planted deepest in me, that meant I was unlovable. And I couldn't escape it. Couldn't fix it. Couldn't drum up my own lovableness. Bologna and cheese sandwiches in the garage, shingles at the hotel spa in Benjamin, and about that time, God was connecting these dots for me, diagnosing the particular strain of deception that lives deepest in me. One evening, Kirsten and I happened across this photo. And she showed it to me on her phone. And she said, you know, when I see photos like this from a year ago, my instant reaction is always, did that even happen? Because you hardly stopped. You hardly slowed down. You just acted strong and kept going. And you know, her mantra to me the whole time was, Tyler, let yourself be weaker. And I can still see her there making me banana bread every 48 hours because it was the only thing I could keep down, and sanitizing my clothes and changing my sweat-drenched sheets. And laying in bed next to me when I was sick and exhausted, but the sun was still up, and sitting next to me at chemotherapy, where she didn't let a day go by when I was alone, not a single day. She was trying to love me. She was loving me. But at the exact same time, I was trying to earn her love by unburdening her, by not being too much, by pretending that I was strong. Tyler, let yourself be weaker. Because she loves me, and it's hard to love somebody who's always strong. It's hard to love somebody that pretends to be without need, to have it all together. She wanted to love me, and I wanted so badly to be loved, but the way I was looking for love was a deception, an accusation, a lie. The way I was chasing her love was actually running away from it because it was built on a false story. It was bologna and cheese sandwiches in the garage here in my late 30s as a cancer patient. And repair for every last one of us, friends. Repair begins with sober-minded honesty about exactly what got broken in you and me first. And it wasn't moral or behavioral for any one of us. Not at the root. Maybe it gets expressed that way, sure, but deeper than that, it is relational, a fundamental misunderstanding about love, about how to find it, who gives it to me, and how I give it to other people. So in this moment of prayer, when God was piecing together those scenes from my life like a master director, I realized that I am the older brother. I'm standing outside with my arms crossed, so desperately wanting the love of my Maker. And he's saying to me the whole time, I'm always with you. and everything I have is yours. And that's got nothing to do with what you've done or haven't done, and everything to do with who I am and what I've done. It's got nothing to do with all your attempts to rescue yourself, and everything to do with my relentless commitment and power to rescue you by love. And those promises about restored love that Jesus made on his last night in John 14, he culminates by saying, peace I leave you, my peace I give you. I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. The peace Jesus promises here, it's offered to a group of disciples with plenty of reasons to be afraid. They're about to be left alone, watch their leader be executed, then become hated, hunted, and oppressed overnight. Circumstantially speaking, things are far from peaceful. So what kind of peace does Jesus have in mind? Relational peace. Here's your source of peace. My Father will love you. And through the Spirit I'm going to pour out, we're going to make our home with you. That which went wrong at the very beginning, that which went wrong at its root, I've now healed at its root. And that is peace. It's not the absence of chaos. It is knowing my irrevocable presence and love right in the thick of chaos. Peace is theosis. It's communion with the God who is love that remakes me in his very image. So are you the younger son? Wandered from who you know yourself to be at your very core? Like in your recent personal history, have you lost yourself in some profound way? Maybe lost God in the process. Now I wonder what it might be like if you were today willing to turn and face the darkness that you've been avoiding and stare long and hard into it and begin to pray and to wait to see if the sun might rise, if God might mix his light with your darkness in a way that is somehow mysteriously, in a way that only he could do, even more beautiful than if there was no darkness to light up at all. Because, sometimes God heals us slowly and gently. But there's other times when he just overpowers the lies that we believe in an instant. When he runs out to meet us and welcomes us home. Restores us all at once. Or are you the older son? Found a way to stay on the property to keep it between the lines, all the while pursuing love on your terms through some twisted deception of the serpent. Holy Spirit, right now, I just wonder if you would peel open the life of a few sons and daughters in this room, and you would do for them what you did for me. You would just begin to unmask some lie that he or she has believed, some shame that is holding the pen and authoring their story. So that your love might touch an untouched place in the life of a few to bring healing today. Why don't we stand and respond together now?
Thanks for joining the Bridgetown family as we engage in this teaching series. To learn more about the life of our church and how you can get involved, visit bridgetown.church/welcome. If you're interested in contributing financially to Bridgetown Church and to our ministry, you can do that at bridgetown.church/giving. Wherever you're joining us from, we hope this resource blesses you and encourages you to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did.